The Florida collapse, the tower that came down, that was a horrific tragedy. Many, many lives are now presumed lost. I want to go through this case because we haven't talked much about this on this channel, but now we're getting to the point where we're sort of coming out the other end of this. We're sort of looking back and saying, how did something like this happen? We've got government officials up the wazoo everywhere you turn, investigating and inspecting and auditing. And I used to be a swimming pool construction person. I started off as a swimming pool repair cleaning guy. Then I turned into repairs and I started actually designing, bidding, permitting them, and then actually being the superintendent back when I was in high school and college, and my father was dragging me around before then, cleaning pools and things like that. So I have a lot of experience with permitting and inspections and getting things through the city. And I know what a big kind of mess it is with all this red tape and inspections every which way you go. And so how does something like this happen, right? Who's responsible for this? Who were these inspectors that just kind of went to this building and said, yeah, looks good to me. We'll come back next year. And who was responsible for actually running the building, right? Who are the business owners or the building owners? There's a lot of negligence going on. And the question is, does this sort of cross the line where it becomes just a tragic accident to something that was really criminal? People who knew that this thing was not in good shape, but they just kind of, looked the other way because they were making money. It was going to cost millions of dollars to repair this building. Of course, they didn't want to come out of pocket. So we're going to be asking ourselves a lot of questions. And I want to go through this with a little bit of a background because, of course, we have not talked about it here on this channel quite yet. So an update comes over from the New York Times. You can see here the known death toll of last week of the collapse of the condominium rose by 4, so the total death count is now up to 16. Now, this is on Wednesday. Authorities said more bodies were recovered from the rubble. Now, they are telling us at a news conference that 147 people remain missing, nearly a week after the desperate search for survivors began. And, I am somebody who likes to keep a lot of hope, right? I'm very hopeful they find more people alive, but I think we've also recognized that it is a week later. The entire building has collapsed. I'm not sure that we're going to see many more of those 147 people, unfortunately. And I'm not trying to be, doom and gloom with this here, but we're going to look at some pictures here shortly. Chief Alan Kominski said, it's an extremely, extremely difficult situation. We're looking for signs of life. Even as days pass with little hopeful news, they're going to continue to remain focused. Says there's an overwhelming amount of grief, said Ron DeSantis. Inclement weather has continued to hamper their abilities. Florida's Division of Emergency Management, Kevin Guthrie, says, we have done this before. We've responded to multiple emergencies in the state at the same time. As the search in Surfside has dragged on, volunteers and rescue teams have gathered. Local leaders are also warning of trying to take advantage of this disaster, creating fraudulent online fundraising and stuff like that. People are just the worst. So there will be, of course, people who want to, I lost my brother in there and raise some money. Search teams said on Tuesday they had removed more than 3 million pounds of debris. Miami-Dade officials have declined to release the names of nearly 150 people who remain unaccounted for, many of their families gathered in South Florida. So we're going to go through this a little bit. We have a statement from the attorney, the state attorney. Her name is Fernandez Rundle. We're going to hear from her in a minute, but I want to show you sort of what the New York Times was showing us today. This is the aftermath of the tower collapse. You can see the size and the scale of this thing is massive, right? Those are huge concrete barriers. They're using cranes to take those pillars that are concrete loaded with rebar, and they're just, clear. 3 million pounds has already been taken away, and they're still just going through this thing. It actually looks like a bomb went off or a building. Yeah. So you get the picture. It's hard to imagine that anybody would survive that, right? It is like a building exploded. The whole thing collapsed. Anyways, horrible tragedy. We're all trying to figure out what happened here so that it does not happen again. And what is really sort of shocking about these cases is it sounds like there were many people who knew this was a problem, but everybody's sort of pointing their fingers around at each other, right? This is the problem with bureaucracy. This is the problem with sort of relieving people of personal responsibility for managing things. If you can always point to somebody else who's responsible for that, oh, the government said that was fine. Oh no, there's a safety warning there. Oh no, it was inspected. Oh no, and you just go, I don't have to think about anything because somebody else did the thinking for me. And the question is, did some of that happen here, right? And we're still in the middle of a tragedy, so it's hard to get out here and start pointing fingers every which way. But we are at a moment now where I think it's appropriate to start at least asking those questions, right? What happened here? And what we know now from the New York Times that there was some hint, there was an indication that this was an ongoing problem. Less than 3 months before the collapse, the president of the condominium association warned in a letter that the damage to the building had gotten significantly worse since it was highlighted in a 2018 inspection. So they knew about it. He says, "Dear neighbors, many of the questions coming to the office ahead of next week's special meeting to discuss the proposed special assessment of $15 million are not related to the assessment. We've got engineer fees, 20% contingency, financial oversight, all the presentations and meeting minutes. Okay, this is happening 3 weeks ago before the collapse took place." So he says the purpose of next week's meeting is only to discuss the proposed special assessment. Seems like a good moment to give a summary of our progress so that we can focus on this meeting. It's called the State of the Building meeting, right? Kind of like State of the Union, but State of the Building. Here it says the 40-year building inspection is required by law. An engineer, Frank, came over. He was hired in 2018, and he was going to do an inspection for the 40-year inspection deadline. Comes due later this year. He says, among multiple things, the estimate included concrete damage, observed that would begin to multiply exponentially over the years. Indeed, observable damage, such as in the garage, it's gotten significantly worse. When you can see visually the concrete spalling or cracking, that means the rebar holding it together is rusting and deteriorating beneath the surface, right? And so if you're not familiar with construction, I did a lot of this type of work. When you build a swimming pool, it's sort of the same shell that you'll see in a lot of other constructions. It's essentially concrete and steel. It's concrete filled with rebar. So what you'll do is you'll dig the hole, then you put in the electrical work, you put in the plumbing, then you'll go and you'll actually steel it, right? So you put rebar in there and you make this little grid that sort of looks like a cage within the pool. Then you come in and you do shotcrete. And so you take this sort of hose that shoots concrete out of it like a fire hose, and you have these guys. Typically, when I was working, I want to be very inclusive here, but it was typically men who would take this hose and they would sort of roll it over their shoulder, and it would shoot concrete out at extremely high psi, so it would just blast it into the wall, called shotcrete, and it's shooting shotcrete into the wall, and you build these walls, or you basically shoot the entire shell of the wall. Now, oftentimes, what would happen is the concrete would be a little bit thin when it would be covering the rebar, or what you would have would be sort of problems with the rebar where it would be kind of leaking through the concrete. And now when we're talking about a swimming pool, you're not worried about stuff falling down on your head, but those were still big problems. We would actually have to drain pools. If this would happen, drain pools and have somebody come in, cut out with a saw, cut out that portion of the pool, and then steel and pin, rebar it, and then reconcrete it back up in a pool, just to stop the pool from having structural problems. So now you can imagine something similar happening, right, on a much bigger scale. We're talking about huge pieces of steel and concrete that are creating these massive pillars and these massive walls, and then they're actually seeing the rebar come through the concrete. And if you've ever worked in construction or you know what I'm talking about, you're going, oh my goodness. And wait until you see these pictures. It's actually insane. Please note the original scope of the work in 2018 report has expanded. Other projects, okay, they're looking at $9.1 million cited in the report. A committee has been formed to evaluate supervising engineers to oversee this. We've got a manager with 40 years of experience also getting involved in starting the work. So they say the above work was accomplished over a 2-year period, several different boards. Let's see what else we have. Morbido carried out a much more detailed survey of the property. He said, here's what we should do in stages. So an initial exploration of the concrete and the driveway soffit. This was a bid outdone last year. Then they got to repair the roof. So they're going to, the concrete and the driveway. They got OSHA, anchor replacements, AC, exhaust fans, all, scaffolding, window washers. Okay, how about this? A moisture survey was also done to evaluate the roof last year, showing the need for extensive repairs, right? Moisture, the roof is it's on the beach. There's a lot of moisture there. It's Florida. Have you ever been to Florida? It is extremely humid. It's almost like walking through the ocean on a daily basis. So you can imagine that there's going to be a lot of water damage and a lot of moisture damage that will need to be addressed on a regular basis. And they've identified that. The main project involving concrete and waterproofing is by far the largest phase. So they say they've identified a lender to accomplish this multi-year project. Got to get some funding. We've now arrived at the special assessment to pay for this. $15.5 million is what is needed in order to repair this building. So the president, the board of directors, Gene Wodnicki, says, look, for those who wanted a better understanding of the projects, I hope this helps. I acknowledge we're talking about a huge project and a very large assessment. Your board of directors, we're working very hard to bring this forward. We're going to do everything we can. There are many moving parts, a lot to discuss. I've attached copies. We've got, different things we have to discuss. Look forward to seeing you all next week. So the question, what happened with that? I'm sure there's going to be some meeting minute entries that may have been, no, we don't need any 15 million. No, we could do that next year, right? Now 160 people or so are dead. So, this is where now people start asking themselves, was there malfeasance? Was there negligence that rises to the point of criminality? Was this people that just made a mistake? Was this just an accident? Or were these people who go, $15 million? I don't want to pay for that garbage. Are you nuts? So we're not going to do that, right? We're going to sort of, patch that up here. Well, go down to Home Depot and get some concrete and just patch that wall up, cover that rebar up. Nobody will tell the difference, right? Is there any of that type of stuff going on? Now, the state attorney, Fernandez Rundle, she is going to be taking a deeper look into this. So she came out, she released a statement here, June 29th, a statement from the Miami-Dade state attorney, Catherine Fernandez Rundle. Okay, and so I want to sort of flesh this out a little bit here. When we talk about different governmental attorneys, there's so many different names that you hear about. And oftentimes on this show, we talk about prosecutors, right? These people who are in charge of bringing criminal offenses against one particular person and running that throughout the court system. They only work on criminal cases. They only do criminal law. So those are typically what we call prosecutors. Sometimes you'll refer to them as county attorneys. Sometimes you'll refer to them as district attorneys or U.S. attorneys if you're talking about federal cases. We also have, though, what are called state attorneys or city attorneys that are sort of a separate entity from the prosecuting attorney. And typically these people are sort of the government's lawyer, right? So they'll, if a prosecutor says, hey, I've got this criminal lawyer like me, somebody who's, given me a real difficult time. There may be a little pain in my rear end over here. And they're maybe making allegations that I was ethically improper, right? I was doing something inappropriate, or I was, maybe on the margin of something like that. And so I'm a little bit concerned about this. So maybe I, as a city prosecutor, I need to go to the city attorney and get some legal advice on how to deal with this stuff. So it's somebody who's sort of representing the city or the state for all sorts of legal claims that might come through. And so, I'm not a practicing attorney in Florida. Don't know Miami-Dade with any specificity, but this is what it sort of is feeling like to me, right? She's a state attorney, not necessarily a prosecutor. And so what she put out here is a statement saying, few words can describe the shock and the horror this morning that the tragic event occurred. I deployed senior prosecutors to the disaster site to collaborate with the engineers and other investigators to assist as needed. Okay, she also says, I sent victim specialists to the site in order to be available around the clock, help with family and friends. Since that time, I visited the scene multiple times. Each time I've gone, I'm overwhelmed by the heroics of everybody who is responding. I know personally from speaking with the engineers that they're working hard. They're working with the NIST, National Institute of Standards and Technology, to figure out exactly how and why the building collapsed. Will take a long time, she says, right? So a lot of information, a lot of investigation is going to be taking place here. It is painstaking and complicated work. I will not do anything to jeopardize their investigative findings, which will hopefully prevent future tragedies like this from happening. So you can see here, we've got senior prosecutors and we also have victim specialists. So those, of course, are sort of two sides of criminal law. Prosecutors are people who typically prosecute crimes, as I just explained. We also have victim specialists. Now, typically, we see these people, let's say, we call them victims advocates here in Arizona. But if there's a domestic violence case, let's say, for example, and let's say the male, it's a male-female situation. The male, of course, is 99 times out of 100 the one who's arrested. So they get taken into custody and they're now going to be prosecuted. So the person with whom they were in the altercation, that individual is going to be labeled the victim, regardless of what the facts say. That's just how it typically works. That person, one person gets labeled the defendant, the other is the victim, even though we have the presumption of innocence in this country and that person has not been convicted or taken a plea deal or anything quite like that yet. We just use those labels because that's what we do now. So that is also something that exists in criminal law. And it sounds like this city attorney was sort of sending some of those people that would be assigned a victim specialist, somebody who works with the victims of a crime, to go out there and be available. Okay. Not necessarily that this is their particular line of work, but this attorney is just sort of calling everybody, go out and help, right? So I can certainly appreciate that, because it's sort of all hands on deck when stuff like this happens. Now, she continues on. She says, however, this is a matter of extreme public importance, and as the state attorney elected to keep this community safe, I will not wait. My office has a long tradition of presenting more than just criminal cases to the grand jury. Our grand juries have served a cross-section of the community to talk about all sorts of issues like health and public safety. So, for example, after Hurricane Andrew, a grand jury issued a report that helped lead to better building codes. Also, a grand jury made recommendations about the environmental integrity of the Biscayne Bay, the financial survival of Jackson Memorial Hospital, safety of public housing community, etc. To that end, I plan to request our grand jury to look at what steps we can take to safeguard our residents without jeopardizing any scientific, public safety, or potential criminal investigations. Okay, so see that word right there? Criminal investigation. So first priority, safeguarding the residents. Certainly don't want to jeopardize anything else, but then turning their eye over to criminal investigations. And prosecutors were there, right? Sent them right out there. So they're going to be looking around. Now, are those prosecutors up to speed on charging crimes when situations like this happen? Probably not, because they don't happen all that often. But I think the underlying point, and hats off to this attorney for just saying, we're going to go help, right? Everybody goes and helps. Whatever we need, go help. I certainly appreciate anybody trying to just be helpful. Always appreciate that. So she finishes off, says, as your attorney, I assure you my attorneys and staff were dedicated to ensuring that those who were lost will never be forgotten. So we'll see where that goes. I really have a big issue when, I have a lot of issues with the government in general, as you may know. But one of the things that they're supposed to do, one of the things that they tell us about all the time is that, well, what regulations? We need regulations. And what happens if you just, you wacky libertarians out there, what happens if we don't have regulations? All these buildings will just start falling down, right? You'll have all these people who just, build shoddy work and all of that stuff. And then stuff like this happens and you say, well, we have a ton of regulations. How did this possibly happen? It's because it's a deferment of responsibility. Everybody just points the finger at somebody else down the line. Then we have buildings, and it's not just one building, folks, right? This is like the whole stinking shoreline over there. Over from the Epoch Times, it says a government audit now. This was written by Jack Phillips. A government audit finds 24 Miami-Dade buildings have unsafe structural violations after the condo collapses. So here's one picture, and now everybody's going, sweetie, should we check our building? There's water down in that basement, and should we go look? And the answer, of course, is yes, right? Everybody should look. You sort of have an obligation to make sure that you're responsible for your own life, and probably a good idea to make sure that everything's okay, at least for the foreseeable future, because we know how much these building codes mean, really. So 24 Miami-Dade apartment complexes, including 2 owned by the county, were found to have unsafe structural violations. 24 buildings appeared on a list released late Monday that was reported by the Miami-Dade government. According to the list, 2 buildings owned by the county, were constructed around the time of 1970. It's an 86-unit public housing complex. The audit found that Little River Plaza, it was cited in 2015, needed lighting improvements. Other details were not provided, but they've commented, or Epoch Times has commented Miami-Dade for more information. So let's see what the findings say. Local government claimed that the building codes have cropped up due to a lack of federal funding. Don't you love that? Oh my gosh, these people are just... Local government, we need more money. Yeah, we need more money. There you go. Michael Liu, the housing director for the county, told the newspaper that the area is about $10 million short, forcing his agency to make difficult choices based on the severity and threats of health and safety. More money. Okay. The findings were revealed after Miami-Dade County Mayor Daniela Levine ordered an audit of the building. 11 people are now dead, they say. The building was flagged in 2018 for having major structural damage. The county requires buildings to undergo recertification every 10 years, starting built in 1981. In a statement over the weekend, the government announced that they're going to conduct an audit of residential properties that are 5 stories or higher 40 years or older that have not completed the process. So they're going to go audit everybody and let you know. Monday night, officials announced the death toll now stands at 11. 150 remain unaccounted for. So for any buildings located within municipalities, the mayor urges cities to swiftly conduct their own similar audits. The county will work closely with municipalities and provide any technical assistance necessary. Family members of those inside the buildings have been coping, and yeah, our prayers are with them, because oh my goodness. Your family, the building just collapses. What do you mean the building collapsed? It just fell. They were all inside? Yeah, they were all inside. I just can't even imagine that. All right, so let's take a look now at what was going on inside the building. This is a very interesting couple photographs we've got. So a pool contractor, as I mentioned at the start of this segment, I used to be a pool contractor, okay? Before law school, this is what I did. And I built a lot of swimming pools. I got a lot of familiarity with this. And I know you're here for legal analysis, but indulge me, my old pool boy days. Pool contractor photographed damage 36 hours before the Florida condo fell. Troubling photographs were taken. The contractor says that there was standing water all over the parking garage, and the commercial pool contractor snapped startling images. The contractor does not want to be named, obviously, visited the building last week to prepare a bid for a cosmetic work on the pool, right, to provide a cost of new equipment as part of a multi-million-dollar restoration. So he said he had gone into, quote, some scary places during his decades of work, but was particularly struck by the lack of maintenance in the basement and the amount of water that was there. It was so unusual, he mentioned it to a building worker named Jose, according to the Herald. So what did Jose do with that information? And what's Jose expected to do? He sends it to the building owner and he says, no, it's fine. Okay, it's been fine for 40 years. Stop calling me, Jose. Okay, just look, it's cosmetic. I hired you to just patch it up. Don't tell me about the problems. Just fix it. Okay. And now people are dead as a result of that. And so if we had an actual functioning government, you'd think that there would be some people responsible for this, like some people that are, so like this is their job to make sure this stuff doesn't happen, because that's why we need the government all the time. Regulations, well, you don't want to just drive a car that the government doesn't regulate. Well, that we need warning labels on everything, and we have to bubble wrap ourselves in everything. And then when this stuff happens, everybody points their finger at all the different agencies, and we'll see if anything comes of it. I doubt it. We'll see, though. Now, in the rest of this article, we're going to take a deep dive into these images here in a minute. He says he thought it was waterproofing issues. I thought to myself, that's not normal. He said Jose told him they pumped the pool equipment room so often that the pump motors had to be replaced every 2 years. And I can show you this. I'm going to show you this in the actual image that we're going to take a look at. The man never mentioned any structural damage. The contractor told Herald that the deepest puddle was near the parking spot 78 in an area right under the pool, where Frank Morbido, in a damning 2008 private study, flagged multiple major structural damage caused by a leaky pool above the parking garage, right? And this goes back full circle. When I was telling you about how pools get built and you have that rebar concrete problem, you might have a leak, or you might have back pressure coming in the other direction that has a lot of negative consequences for a pool. So the pool's leaking down into the basement, into the parking structure. Been going on for a long time. The whole building collapses. Okay. Pool contractor said he didn't photograph the standing water in that section because he was in the building to check the pool and what was under it. Meanwhile, contractor saw another problem in the pool equipment room on the south side: exposed corroding rebar above the concrete. Up here, we're going to take a look at this up here in a minute. He says he took some photographs, sent them to a supervisor along with a note expressing concern that the job might become more complicated and require the removal of pool pipes to allow access to concrete restoration experts. 2 days later, building partially collapsed. I wonder if this was going on in other parts of the building and caused this collapse, they said. So let's take a look at these photos here. Let's see what else is in here. All right, so we have a couple photos. Rescue personnel work at the scene of the partially collapsed Champlain Towers here. 150 people are still unaccounted for. We see here Maxwell represents the Tower Condo Association. He declined to comment whether he was aware of the issues, right? So these people are all lawyering up, certainly. Don't say a thing, because if they knew about this, right, they're going to be just, oh yeah, no, we were going to fix it and everything. We were working on it. That would open them up to liability. So I'm sure they've all lawyered up now. Mohammed Asani, an engineer and concrete expert, says you can see extensive corrosion of the rebars. That is very serious. He invented the quake wrap technology to reinforce old concrete columns. Said the images showed the worst damages he had seen documented in the building so far. Equipment room runs along the south tower. He says if the conditions of the beam in the pool guys, okay, yeah, very, very concerning, obviously. He says very severe. Paul Rodriguez told the network he received a call from his grandmother the night before the collapse. She complained of creaking noises from the building. Grandmother calls you. Hey, grandson, my building's creaking right now. Oh, it's okay. It's okay, Grandma. It's probably just the wind. It's just nothing to worry about. Go back to sleep. I'll call you in the morning, check on you. Okay, building collapses. This just confirms that maintenance was not done over the many years, said Pablo Rodriguez, right? And if that's the case, that's borderline criminal, if not outright criminal, depending on the context. The board collects over $1 million in maintenance fees from the unit owners every single year. Where was the money going? But it was not going to maintenance, right? So that would be certainly criminal, right? If you're sort of taking money and not, oh my gosh, you see these pictures. All right, so let's go to the photographs. This one we saw, so the building was essentially here, right? It is not here anymore. And this is inside the pool building. And so I want to show you a couple quick things as we sink into these photographs. These photographs they cause me like low grade anxiety just looking at them. Okay, I've done a lot of swimming pool equipment. I've worked in a lot of commercial buildings. I've built commercial swimming pools when I was in college, and we would typically have rooms that look like this, that are all concrete, right? Not anything particularly visually appealing, but what you see here is very, very interesting. So a couple things I want to just point out. First of all, you can obviously tell this is all underground, right? So we've got all of these different pipes running from the floor to ceiling. I'm not seeing anything that look like check valves anywhere. So there may be some check valves further down the line, but what the check valves do, maybe that is one. I can't see it there, but what they do is they stop the water from working its way back down. If you pump water up, you got to stop it from coming back down. So you'd have some valves that would prevent that from happening, which may have, because I don't see them anywhere, that may have caused the standing water to be down there very regularly, right? So you pump the water up, the way a check valve works, you pump the water up and the valve will open. And if the water tries to come back down, the valve will close so that the water can't come back down. Now, if you have a situation, maybe the pumps are running full time, I don't know what they're doing, but you can also see that there has been what we call some surgery going on, major surgery happening here. So if you notice between all these different pipes, like over here on this side of this image, you'll see all these different couplings here. So this is one piece of pipe that's connected between two. Oh, this looks like a check valve right here. So this is a check valve, so that's happening. And it looks like somebody installed that. And so what you see, all these different splices, all these different couplings here, coupling here, coupling here, coupling here. We've got coupling here. We've got another coupling over here. We've got many, many couplings. You've got just gallons of glue that are just being dumped into these different joints. And you obviously have people that really are just not that great plumbers that are just sort of reconnecting everything. And so when I'm talking about couplings, it's sort of like Legos. You need something to kind of connect two pieces together to make the magic dinosaur or whatever. And what they're doing here is they're sort of cutting the pipe, removing old equipment, and then splicing it back together again. And as Jose told us, they were replacing the pumps every 2 years. And you can see that down here, right? He's confirming that for us, because you can see down here that we've got two different, so this is a pool pump and motor. On this side, we can see this white pump housing part of the actual device, that this is where the water comes in. It's got the basket, and this captures all the debris. This is the filter pump. It's taking the water and shoving it down into this pool pump over here. But you'll notice the back end is black, right? The front end is white. The back end is black because this is the motor. This is the electrical component that actually pumps the water through it. So they've replaced this probably many, many times. They're not replacing the pump itself. They are replacing the motor because the motor keeps giving out. The rest of this just looks absolutely, horrendous. I can't imagine that any of this is to code at all. You see all of these different electrical boxes here, all these different sort of actuators and different things that are all just sort of, strapped onto the wall with wires every which way. Not sure that would ever pass code in Arizona. All sorts of major problems just with the pool plumbing. And the reason why the plumbing is problematic is because if there's water, that's going to trickle back down into the basement. That's going to bleed through the rebar, as you can see up here. So this is actually rebar that is just bleeding its way through the concrete right here. And you can see these massive gaps, these massive cracks up here. So, I've been in a lot of bad pool rooms, and I've built a lot of pools. Low grade anxiety just looking at that, and walking in there, you'd go, I don't know that I'd want to be in that building. You can see right here, you can actually see the building sort of just like bursting apart at the seams. It's like actually like bursting, like coming out. That's rebar working its way out of the concrete. It's insane that this was allowed to carry on like this. And you've got a bunch of people pointing their fingers, no, maintenance and directors and all this stuff. The question becomes, did something cross the line? Is this an accident? Is this regular negligence? Or is this something that is criminal, that warrants a much deeper investigation? We're certainly going to find out. Biden's going to visit down there on Thursday. So he's going to go down there tomorrow. He's going to leave the White House and we're going to see if he visits the site, but he's got no plans to go down there. Told reporters of his plans to visit, says hopefully as early as Thursday. Press Secretary Jen Psaki told reporters on Tuesday that Biden wants to thank first responders. He spoke to Ron DeSantis and he approved emergency declarations in Florida. Psaki also told Biden that did not have any plans to visit the building. We don't know. He says, we don't want to draw resources that are needed in the ongoing search and rescue operations. We'll remain in close contact with officials on the ground. Yeah, I mean, I know that, presidents typically don't like to go into disaster zones, right? George Bush didn't go land in Katrina, right? He flew over it, looked out the window, and everybody was really mad about that for some time. But he didn't want to go down there because it was madness, right? It was chaotic. And when the president rolls into town, you bring the whole entourage, Air Force One, everything. And so it turns into this sort of a big logistical nightmare, which is why presidents typically don't go those places. So, Biden not going there doesn't necessarily mean anything. Now, the other reason is because typically people like when presidents show up. They want to come and, be there and support them. I'm not sure that Joe Biden draws a crowd. We saw that during the campaign. But Politico wraps up, says on Tuesday, Psaki emphasized the previous day's point that the administration will not disrupt local operations in visiting the site. The visit is, of course, being done closely with officials on the ground to ensure that does not draw any critical local resources away. As of Monday, 11 people confirmed dead, 150 are still unaccounted for. We've got a lot of people who are, of course, working on that over there. But it is going to be a long, long road, no doubt about it. All right, so we're going to take some questions over from watchingthewatchers.locals.com. I am not seeing them in my slides, so I am going to hop on over to the chat and see if there's anything going on in there. So we've got a couple comments. I'm just going to read through them briefly. We've got Speech Unleashed in the House says, I think we will find out what happened and who is accountable. DeSantis will need to use this as a chance to show how effective he is with handling a disaster, especially if he plans on running for the president in the future. So that is from Speech Unleashed. Yeah, I think that DeSantis is doing something that is very aggressive, right? We're seeing him every single day. He's just constantly coming up with new activities, and it's quite impressive. Now, I am hopeful, honestly. I think that when the government sets the standard, when they set the floor, when they say, listen, one of the things that we're going to do is make sure that we've got regulations, make sure that we are setting a baseline. When they don't do that, there should be some pretty serious repercussions for that, right? Because we're relying on them. It's like when you entrust, I make the same point with the police all the time. When we entrust the police to exercise a higher standard of care, they have to abide by that, right? When they drop below that standard, there are pretty serious problems. Why? Because we give them extra power. Remember what Spider-Man said? With special powers come special responsibilities, or something like that. We give the police a monopoly on the use of force. We have to follow their commands and all of this stuff. So we expect them to act with a little bit more obligation, with a little bit more duty to provide a higher standard of care. Same with these government officials, right? If we're all going to just outsource our personal responsibility for our lives to the federal government, to the local governments, and just expect them to make sure that everything operates perfectly for us, then, and they fail at that, there should be really big consequences for them. Anytime the government fails at their job, all they do is they just point fingers every which way, right? Like exactly what's happened. Or what they do is they just blame you, America. They blame Americans for it. Not funding enough, not being patriotic enough, liking Trump too much, whatever it is. They just sort of, throw it back your direction. So DeSantis is sort of flipping the script on that a little bit. And so we've got some slides now. Let's see what's going on over here. Want to Know says the big problem is the condo owners vote down the improvements for money reasons. What happens if the condo owners can't afford to pay for upgrades? Always comes down to money. Well, then I guess that happens. I mean, I don't know, I don't know what to say about it. I think that there's probably a disconnect between responsibility. Everybody's saying that it's good enough. Why is it good enough? Well, because the government said so. And And we just sort of, believe in the regulations, and buildings don't fall down. This is the United States. And so now a building falls down. We have, who's up next? Let's see. We've got Jupa in the house, says, buildings don't come down like that. I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but doesn't seem right. Yeah, it does. So I understand that perspective. I sort of kind of thought that instinctually. So I like conspiracy theories, okay? I am a criminal defense attorney. A lot of what I do is conspiracy theory, generally speaking, right? I'm always asking those questions. So when I use I don't even like the word conspiracy theorist, right? It's always sort of about exploring alternative explanations. And oftentimes they're accurate, right? Oftentimes it's not just what we see on the news. There are other explanations for this, because when this stuff happens, of course, everybody's covering their tails, and nobody wants to do any deep dive and figure out who's actually responsible for this, especially if it's the government, because we don't want anybody to lose faith in the government. So, I did initially have some questions when the building came down. It was very curious that it was right in the middle of infrastructure conversation, right? Biden and the Republicans are talking about infrastructure. Meanwhile, a building falls down. You're going, well, that's a pretty nice coincidence there, isn't it? Here you are talking about the crumbling infrastructure of America. Meanwhile, in Miami, you got buildings falling down. So, yeah, it sort of makes you go, huh? That's weird. But at the same time, when I see pictures of what the pool boy was showing us, you go, oh, well, that's obvious why the building fell down. And it's just incompetence, but it could also be something that's layered on some criminality, some sort of gross negligence, and somebody should be responsible for that. And if the government, if it's their obligation to go and uphold this, they're accepting this responsibility. We expect them to do this. And if they're not doing a good job at that, well, they've got to be held responsible for it, as do the building owners and the investors or the people who are responsible for this stuff. There needs to be some action on this stuff. All right. Sharon says, this is the problem with bureaucratic government agencies. Buck passing, no accountability. Wasn't there any inspections or oversight for safety? It's just incredible that something like this could happen. Let's bring on a humongous class action lawsuit. Yeah, good point there, Sharon. We've got Want to Know says attorneys are swarming on it. Money and criminal. I would say nothing. Call my attorney. Sorry. That's the right way to handle situations nowadays. Too many attorneys involved. Money draws themselves out. Yeah, that's Want to Know. And yeah, you're going to imagine lots of lawyers, lots of class actions going on all over the place. LT13 says, do you think at all it was an explosion? That was just crazy for a structural failure. So, I don't know. I couldn't really opine on it. I'm not an engineer by any stretch of the imagination. I do have some construction background, of course, but, going down into the ground, and I built some stuff going up. So we've done big waterfalls and all sorts of, water features and cascading things, and we've done some cool stuff, but it was in a different lifetime. And so I'm not particularly, qualified, I think, to talk about an explosion or anything like that. I did see in some videos that there were some sparks that kind of went off. So there was one video, I think it was security footage of the night that it actually collapsed, and there were a bunch of sparks going off inside the building, and people are saying, well, there you go, right? It's just like 9/11. We saw those sparks, and people are saying that those were incendiaries going off or something like that. I'm not so sure that I believe that at all, really, but I do think that those are probably just electrical sparks. As the building was sort of falling, everything is disconnecting, snapping, and you're going to see sparks when you have 220 conduit ripping in half throughout the building. So I'm certainly pre-pool boy photos, I was a little bit more skeptical. Pool boy photos, I just say, oh my gosh, that's just absolute negligence. It's gross negligence, but I don't know that it's actual intentional nuking of the building. I haven't seen any of that, and I don't think that we will. Want to Know says, DIMS in Miami will probably set up a 2-year investigation and task force, then say it needs more money and government regulation. That's exactly what's going to happen. We need more regulation and we need more money. That's what all of these things are about. It's never about the idea that, hey, you American people are responsible for your own lives. If you want to live in a building, you have some responsibility to make sure that it's safe. Okay, because you're an adult person in society. We are not going to be able to wrap you in bubble wrap everywhere you go. I'm sorry. Okay, we can't do that. We're talking about parents and children. Okay, we just had a whole meeting today about that at our firm. We talk a lot about communication and about adults acting like adults, not acting like we're in a situation where we have parents that are constantly needing to nurture the children, right? And this is kind of what our current government is treating us. We're all just a bunch of children. Oh no, put your mask on. Oh no, stay home. Oh no, it's safe because we said so. Just do whatever we say and everything's going to be okay. Well, they listen to you there in Florida. So our building looks pretty much like it's going to fall over. It's okay. You're fine, Grandma. Just go back to bed. Not even anything to worry about. And we'll see what happens. Of course, the answer is never personal. And I'm not blaming the people for this, right? Anybody who is involved in this building or any one of these catastrophes, I don't blame the people who were killed at all. Not even at all. I feel terrible for them. It's a sad thing that the government is, the people are going to be harmed. The government is trying to help, according to themselves. Oh no, we're going to, we need to make things equal and make sure that everybody's cared and there's proper regulations and blah, blah, blah. Well, what ends up happening is people give up their own capability to judge their surroundings for them because they think somebody else is taking care of them. And then stuff like this happens, and it's going to continue to happen. There's 24 other buildings. We're going to see more of this stuff, folks. I just saw today that in New York, governor or whatever the leadership is over there, they just sent out an email or a text message. Hey, turn off all your electricity because we're not going to be able to keep the energy on because of the heat wave. And we're seeing just infrastructure failure all across the country. And the solution currently is about more money, more spending. We'll see if that happens. Texas couldn't keep their energy going. California's going to have rolling brownouts. New York's doing the same thing. And it's just a failure kind of everywhere you look. Buildings are falling down in Florida. It's not a good situation, my friends. Now, let's continue on. We've got a couple more. We've got Jeremy Batritas in the house, says, clearly the building was over 40 years old, built in 1980 on reclaimed wetlands. They probably should have evacuated the building if it wasn't safe. Depending on how much the owner can afford, I can imagine they were cutting corners and selfishly deciding they would repair the building before anything catastrophic would happen. Sometimes to understand a situation, we need to think like humans, not like building inspectors. A horrible situation, but understandable. Well, it's very reasonable there, Jeremy. I tend to get, angry with these things because I just feel bad for the people in there. If in my opinion, right, if you would have communicated the actual legitimate status of that building to all of these residents, if you communicated the severity of the structural problems to people, I think people might have been intelligent enough to make the decision that they don't want to live there anymore. But they never got that opportunity because they sort of deferred responsibility to other people who easily accept that. Oh no, don't worry about the building. It's fine. I'm the director of whatever. I'll take control of this. Okay, so I'm not going to worry about it. I'm not going to go down there. I'm not going to move. I'm not going to find a different place to go. I'm trusting you that you're going to take care of me. Well, guess what? They don't. They're bureaucrats. They don't care about anybody except themselves and their own power. Most of them. Not everybody is a bad government employee, but it's turning into a situation where everybody just passes the buck, and the people that need to be in the know they sort of relieve themselves of any of the thinking, any of the hard thinking that needs to go into this thing. And we see situations like this, and it's not good. All right. We've got a few more. We've got Jupa says, complete and utter incompetence, or worse, complete disregard for safety and human life. Agree with you there. And Soul Viking says, this is a common problem across condos that are decades old. Oftentimes, new codes to keep people safe are not physically possible without demolishing the building. The building's HOA was aware of a $15 million structural issue, but they were deferred from at least 2018. Distressing, so very sad that there was a loss of life due to this. I couldn't agree more. I just can't imagine it. All right. Hack Consulting, last one, says, I propose critical liberty theory, CLT. Is liberty present would be the key issue. Also, you are not supposing an assumption, but rather analyzing a situation or an event or place for liberty, which is either you can do what you ought to do to survive peacefully without being persecuted due to the lack of liberty, where doing one ought to do ends up getting you locked up or the state is wielded against you. Robert, ask yourself, is liberty present? Can you speak your mind here, there, or over there, or are you tyrannized? If there is no liberty, how do we spark it? Oof, it's a good question. How do you spark liberty, man? I think, if I had to guess, I think it starts with speech, right? That's why it's the First Amendment. We've all got to just stand by our words. That's why I encourage people to start a YouTube channel or get out there and speak, run for something locally. But you gotta use your words and your opinion. Right now, what they're trying to do is limit that, and we see that everywhere you go. Unless you use the right language, you're very cancelable now or demonetizable. We've been thrown off of different platforms, and so I I still think it starts with speaking. There are moments when it's dangerous to speak, when it's an uncomfortable thing to do, but there are consequences for not speaking. You have to live with yourself, knowing that you had something to say. You wanted to see some change in the world, and you didn't say anything. You got to live with that. It's tough, but it's also tough to speak. There are consequences for it, as we all know here. So, all right, great questions. Let me make sure that there was nothing else added. All right, so we're going to change gears now. Thank you for all of those questions. Of course, those came over from watchingthewatchers.locals.com. Very much appreciate your support over there. And we're going to get the live stream figured out soon enough. It's still in beta, so we can't really complain about it. We're pushing the limit here, but we'll see. They'll get the kinks worked out, and we'll be back there. Thank you for all of your love and support over there. All right.